There are decades when nothing happens and weeks when decades happen. This was the most frequently shared quote this year, and quite rightly so. This year changed our perception of time. It showed us the flip side of life. Weeks felt like days. The same day over and over. Our world shrinked to the bare minimum, our goals came to a standstill, and our words did not do justice to the extreme nature of events. 2020 was that kind of year. A year that caught us off guard, a year that felt like a Shakespearean catharsis. We all want to delete it from our lives, but I'm going to ask you to save it, and I'll tell you why. Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. I've learned a few lessons from 2020, like all of you, I'm sure. Lessons from around the world, from countries far off to nations next door. Lessons that I'm sure most of you will relate to and would want to save as we enter 2021. A lesson in preparedness and determination taught to us by Taiwan. It's located right next to the epicenter of this pandemic. It's caught in a never-ending David versus Goliath battle with its giant neighbor. Despite everything, the self-governing island managed a truly admirable pandemic response in less than ideal circumstances. Taiwan has emerged a winner. Less than 800 cases and 7 deaths. France taught us standing up for what's right, no matter the consequences. It decided to put the Constitution above faith, reason above religion, and to make all citizens equal by law despite the global backlash. France upheld freedom of speech, rejected the politics of appeasement, and showed determination to wipe out extremism. Let's learn to call a spade from France. At the same time, let's also learn to move on, to put historical disputes and religious differences to rest. A lesson taught to us by 4 countries in West Asia and Africa, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco and the Sudan. 4 Arab states that made peace with the Jewish state. They ended decades of animosity and established diplomatic ties with Israel. As this year ends, why don't all of us let bygones be bygones? Let's also learn to be honest. A lesson taught to us by Japan, the former Japanese Prime Minister rather. Shinzo Abe, he resigned due to health reasons and ended his run as the country's longest-serving Prime Minister. Most leaders try to hide their health issues. They prioritize power over people and cling to their positions. Mr. Abe broke the norm. And speaking of power, how could we forget the President of the United States? Captain Chaos, the one and only Donald Trump. There's an important lesson for the whole world to learn from his loss. You cannot always brazen it out and act on whim and blame others every time something goes wrong. One moment Trump was attending the Namaste Trump event in India. The next, he was calling India filthy. Trump's policies were driven by his personal idiosyncrasies, his mood. His White House was driven by his family. Let's take this as a lesson on why we need to strengthen institutions and not individuals. Decentralization and checks and balances prevented Donald Trump from undermining the election results. They are an important lesson for every democracy. There's also a lesson to learn from Joe Biden's victory: perseverance. Biden is not an overnight success. His political career spans 50 years. He had been applying for the same job for 32 years. He ran for president in 1988, then 2008, and got lucky the 3rd time in 2020. Some things in life take time. Let this be the most significant lesson from Joe Biden's win: perseverance. Another significant lesson from 2020, you cannot underestimate the power of the youth. From the United States to Hong Kong to Thailand, Gen Z led some of the most powerful movements for change. Some even became a nuisance for their country's leader in ways good and bad. Some were crushed by authoritarian regimes. Others continue to fight for reforms in their country, rather creatively. 2020 also taught us to choose our friends wisely, a lesson Nepal learned the hard way. Kathmandu chose a neighbor famous for laying death traps over a time-tested friend and ally. The country's Prime Minister fixed maps, claimed Indian territories, even Indian gods. Where did all of this take him? To a constitutional crisis. The country's parliament stands dissolved. And then we come to Pakistan. Yes, there's something to learn from Pakistan too. The importance of keeping our debts under check. Islamabad never saved enough to deal with a health crisis like this. It had to turn repeatedly to foreign banks for aid money. In July, the loans jumped by 263%. We are in December now. Things have turned so bad that even China is seeking guarantees for its loans. The lesson here is always keep some cash ready for emergencies. Let's also learn from Turkey, a country paying the price for its leaders' adventurism, for waging costly wars and unnecessary fights with world leaders. The lesson to learn is this: when a leader's personal ambitions shape a country's public and foreign policy, the country is bound to go downhill. Turkey could be on that path. And the list does not end there. Let's also learn from Australia, the first country in the world to pursue an investigation into the origins of this pandemic. It faced threats, tariffs and boycotts from China, but Australia did not budge. It taught us to be unapologetic if your fight is for the truth. Let's learn from the Philippines. It showed us the importance of changing with the times. After 90 long years, the country raised the age of consent from 12 to 16 years. It has a long way to go, but this is a major start nonetheless for a country that had become a global hub for sexual abuse. Let's learn from Canada on why we must not meddle in the internal affairs of other countries. The Canadian Prime Minister offered unsolicited advice on the protests in India. He also cracked down on protesters in his own country. He was left embarrassed and faced criticism, the likes of which he had never seen. The lesson here is, those who live in glass houses should not throw stones at others. And how can we leave China out of this list? Let's learn from China too on how not to make friends. Transactional friendships can be toxic. Instead of using your friends, instead of keeping a score with your allies, encourage and strengthen them. Do not try to steal the share of others, or you'll be left friendless. And finally, let's learn from India on how to respect boundaries, how to reach out to neighbors, how to take everyone along and help others in times of need. There are far too many lessons that 2020 has taught us. The list is never ending. The pandemic may not be coming to an end just yet, but there's something that is. 2020, a year that made us realize that we're so vulnerable yet so powerful, a year of loss and learnings. We say keep the lessons, carry them to the next year and beyond.
Gravitas Plus, co-presented by Skoda. Simply clever.